Hello, everyone out there in podcast world. You're listening to the Service Business Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Tersh. This podcast is focused on service business owners, managers, and technicians who are considering becoming business owners themselves. My goal with this podcast is to ask the guests on this podcast questions that you may not have thought to ask to help arm you so that you become a better business owner, manager, or technician. I'm your host, Tersh. If at any time during this podcast episode you have a question or think about something that you'd like to ask me or for me to reach out to the guest to ask them, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is tersh@icebound.us. That's spelled Tersh at icebound.us, or reach out to me on any social media platform. It's at Tersh Blissett, TershBlissett. It's pretty much the handle that I have everywhere. And don't hesitate to reach out to me. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking with Dwayne Clark. He's most well known for his business called Aegis Living. He's got 40 properties, 3,000 employees. I mean, it's crazy. His revenue is going to be in the $400 million range. I mean, it's insane, the stuff that's going on with his business. And I'm so excited that I had the opportunity to interview Dwayne, and I'm so excited that I'm able to share this interview with you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Dwayne Clark. Thank you for coming on the show, Dwayne.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
No, that's my pleasure. First off, you're a busy guy, so thank you for taking time to share some of what you've learned over the years with the listeners.
My pleasure. Honored to be here.
So on today's episode, we're going to talk about what it took for you to scale, like how you learned what to do, the right things to do, and then also while you're scaling, still maintain the sense of culture to the point to where you could be voted the best place to work, the best workplace. And also, we're going to touch on the topic of why money cannot buy happiness, or why money cannot buy the top talent anymore. And I feel like I agree with that statement a lot, but a lot of people truly, like the conversations that I have with other business owners and entrepreneurs with service business companies, it seems like if we just pay them $50 an hour, we'll get the best people. And a lot of times we have that conversation where we're paying someone $15 or $20 an hour and they're paying $30 and $50 an hour. And the talent that we have is having more fun, enjoying work, and they're producing more revenue than the people who are getting paid the most. So I'm excited to talk about these topics and more with Dwayne. And I guess let's get started with who you are, your background. I mean, some of the listeners may know you. I mean, you've got a lot of you've been in the public eye a lot. But for those of you who don't know about Dwayne, if you will, please introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, first of all. So I have a lot of things going on. So sometimes I confuse listeners because I have a variety of companies and a variety of hobbies and a variety of passions. So I'm the chairman and CEO of a premier senior housing company called Aegis Living, which operates up and down the West Coast. We have about 40 properties, about $3 billion in real estate assets, almost 3,000 employees, hiring another 1,000 employees in the next 36 months. So we're on a rapid growth mode. I started the company almost 22 years ago with a very simple concept that we wanted to be an employee first company. And a lot of people say, well, what does that mean? You wanted to be employee first? And, to your point about the issue of, money can't buy great employees, I wanted to have such a great culture that people would be lined up to come work for me. And a lot of people didn't really understand how that worked and what that meant, but I knew that if we were going to be a company coming out of the ground, that we had to differentiate ourselves through our people. And a lot of people say this, a lot of people give lip service to that, but you really, really, at the end of the day, you have to be passionate about. The CEO has to be passionate about how you do that every day. And so we started off doing some really crazy creative things for our employees. I mean, we started off having our own foundation for employees in the case of emergency. Now, not a lot of people did that.
Oh, wow.
And so we started a 501c3, a not for profit that employees could contribute to this. And an amazing thing happened. I was just talking to our head of HR here a few days ago. Almost 28% of our employees, who these are employees that make 15 to $18 an hour, contribute to this fund. So they see it as a self-sustaining almost insurance policy that if they have an emergency, their house burns down, they have a medical emergency, whatever, that the company's there to offer assistance. And we just give people um, grants in the case of emergency. We've given literally hundreds of grants now over the course of the years. So that was one of the things that we did to differentiate ourselves. We have our own in-house lottery, and that may sound kind of weird to people. And people say, "Well, how could you have your own in-house lottery?" Well, about 2 or 3 years ago, I was walking through one of our buildings. I was talking to one of our staff, one of our line staff. She says, "Oh, I'm going to go. I have to go play Powerball. I'm going to go win the lottery." I said, "Well, really, what's the chances of you winning the lotto?" She goes, "I don't know, but I'm going to drop $20 and spend it." So I went and did some research, and depending on what lottery it is, it's anywhere from 1 in 1 million to 1 in 50 million. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if I had my own in-house lottery and used it as a staff retention tool. So I went back and I talked to my staff, and I talked to them about having this in-house lottery, and they looked at me like I'd lost my mind and been on a desert island for 3 months. They're like kind of rolled their eyes. I'm like, "What are you talking about, an in-house lottery?" So I kept pestering and pestering my chief staff, and every time they see him, I say, "Hey, I want to talk about the lottery." They'd zip out the other corner of the door, to avoid me. And so finally, I pinned them all down. I said, "Hey, we're going to do this. I know you don't like it, but we're going to do it." And what we did is we give away almost $75,000, and we gross that up for taxes. So the employers are paying no tax, and the winner of it, the grand prize winner, wins $50,000. And the way it works is, for every year you've worked with the company, you get an additional chance in the bucket. And so, if you work 15 years for the company, you may have 15 tickets. You're not eligible until you've worked 1 year. And after that 1 year, your name goes in the bucket. Well, what we started to find was this was a staff retention tool, because then people would say, "God, next year I'm eligible for a $50,000 drawing, and my chances of winning are 1 in 350, a lot better than 1 in 10 million." So this really worked as a staff retention tool and has shown tremendous results for the company and getting us a lot of press and publicity and so on.
That is really cool.
So you have to be super creative when it comes to employees and being employee first, and having a superior culture. Last year, Glassdoor, the rating agency for employees, in 2017, we were rated the top 50 company in the nation to work for out of 700,000. About 6 months later, they picked the top 20 company, again out of 700,000 companies, for work-life balance, and we were in the top 15 of those companies. So our work-life balance is really important. And so, to your point, Tersh, about the issue of you can't buy happiness. I have people from multi-billion-dollar companies: Amazon, Four Seasons, Nordstrom, Starbucks. I could keep going down the line, Marriott. And a lot of these people, they just want a quality of life. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to pay them half price,
All right.
you know, but they just want a quality of life that they can say, "I really like my quality of life," and they want to work for a company that they're proud of. So one of the things that's so important these days is kind of having a social mission for people. So it kind of helps them in terms of their consciousness. So we do all kinds of things. I'll give you a great example. About a year and a half ago, I led a march on Washington D.C. called the March for Civility, because I felt like as America we'd lost being civil to each other. And there were hundreds of people involved in the march. We actually had 20 speakers. We spoke from the same spot where Martin Luther King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech, and it was broadcast on a national network, C-SPAN, to over 8 million people. But I brought 100 of my staff on this march with me. I
Oh,
mean, people
cool.
that had worked for me for years, and I said, "I want you to experience this." Those people now say that was one of the greatest experience of their life, marching through downtown DC, speaking from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, having this community together. It cost me a few $1,000s to bring 100 people in, but that was a phenomenal experience for those 100 people that they'll never forget. Now, what happens is those people turn into walking billboards, right? So they went out
Yes.
and said, "God, you won't believe what Dwayne did for me. This was incredible." Um, so, you always have to be thinking about the kinds of things that you can do for your staff that are going to make their quality of life better, and it's often more than the hourly wage.
So, what would you say about a company that's maybe just starting out, or they might only have like 2 or 3 employees other than themselves, and that it's mom and pop shop, and spending $2,000 and taking the time off of work to go to a march in Washington D.C. is kind of out of their mindset.
Yeah,
What would you say to a company like that as far as getting that culture built
yeah,
up?
that's a great question, and there's some really simple things that you can do. So, day one when I started Aegis Living, one of my practices, and it's still true to this day that I did, is when I hired someone, I would find out about their spouse, their partner, their girlfriend, whoever's in their life, and I would write the employee's spouse or partner a letter. And I would say, "I want to thank you. I know this was a big decision for both of you. I want to thank you for trusting your livelihood in me. I won't disappoint you. I want you to know if you ever have any issues that you can call me, and we'll take good care of your husband or your wife or your partner, whoever it is. You're part of our family now." That simple little thing goes so far, because the wife gets the letter, the husband gets the letter, whoever the non-employee is, and they go, "Look, the CEO took time to do this. Isn't this incredible?" So the big thing is get to know your employees. Whether that's if you have 3 employees and one of your employees is really passionate about his kid's little league game, go show up at it for even 30 minutes. Just show up and go, "Hey, I know you're really passionate about your kid's little league game. I just wanted to support you here." Those
Oh, that's
little
cool.
acts of kindness can go a
Yeah.
long ways, and they don't cost any money.
Yeah. I mean, when you started talking about the kids' little league, I was immediately thinking like sponsor a little league team, but you took it even a step further and like not even spending the money, just show up to the game to show your support. I
Well,
mean,
what's
that's even better.
Yeah, what's critical right now, what's valued is time.
Yes,
We
absolutely.
live in a time of our period, our culture, of our universe, that time is the precious commodity. And if you can share time over money, that's really valued, in people's lives.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So, whenever you were coming up through, you starting your business 22 years ago, how how did you know how to scale the way that you did? I mean, you're the fastest growing company in Inc. or was it Inc. or Entrepreneur and
Inc. magazine, yeah,
yeah,
fastest growing company in America, yeah.
yeah. So you're fastest growing company in America, and you're not the only retirement home that's up and coming. So did you have mentors or I mean, I'm thinking of some of the guys that are starting out and we're in Facebook groups together and I see questions constantly. And, sometimes I think of people like yourself and I wonder, you know, how did you scale the way that you did?
Well, that's a big question, because there's all kinds of ways to answer that. I mean, first of all, you have to have a knowledge base, right? So you have to have a critical amount of knowledge about the thing you're about to scale in. So you better make sure you're the best at it, or get very quickly the best at it. So that's one. Two, you have to have your capital base. And so, if you're good at something, people will normally back you. So, I felt like I was the best in my industry at what I did. So I went out and, peddled my wares, my resume, and say, "Hey, I'm starting this company." And this is in 1996, 1997. Um, we raised $22.5 million from friends and family. So, um,
Whoa. You say that again.
that
Say
was
that one more time.
well, we raised $22.5 million from friends and families, about 34 people,
Oh, wow.
and so that's how we started the company. I mean, I put money in. I was working for a public company. I was the executive vice president of a public company, the largest senior housing company in the world at the time, called Sunrise. And I took my stock earnings and we put money in the company and so on. But so you have to have the capital backing. And then the third thing is you have to distinguish yourself somehow. It's just not good enough to say, "Hey, I'm going to go out and start ABC refrigeration tomorrow." Um, you have to say, "Well, what is the spin I'm going to put on it? What is the spin?" And normally there's more than one spin. There's three or four things that you're going to do. So, like, we were an employee first company. We were going to have really creative architecture. We were going to have world class programmatic uh, atmosphere. So, all those things, we're going to hire people, very different people from our industry hired. So, we had these characteristics that made us different. When you do that, that promotes investor intrigue. And the investors then say, "Oh, well, this is different than the normal ABC refrigeration. This sounds really interesting." And that's, you want to pique those guys' interest about how you're going to approach the business aspect. So it's, you just don't go out there and not given any thought and lay out this business plan that's pretty vanilla. You got to do more than that to convince not only your investors but your banks and every else who's going to give you lines of credit, so on. So
Yeah.
those are
So
the three things
there's
that
so
I would.
there's so many times though that you hear people give lip service, like you said mentioned earlier. Um, did you have to show proof that you were going to do this things differently than other people? Because like we all stand behind guarantees, and we're the best in the industry, and we have the most experience in the industry, and like I feel like some of that's like I said, lip service, and it's fake, and it's played out. Did you have to go back and come and actually
Well, you have to,
prove to
yeah.
somebody?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. You got to demonstrate. I mean, if you're going to a bank, this is back in the early '90s. This is 22 years ago. I mean, we were building buildings that were 8, $10 million. Today we're building buildings that are $100 million. But back then, you can't BS your way through this. You got to say, well, if you're gonna be an employee first company, give me the 10 bullet points of how you're going to be a employee first company. And so you'd have to bullet out to them, well, this is the way we're going to do it, and I've tested this theory, and so on. It's business is complicated. It's sophisticated. It's not for the weak of heart. I'm a big sports guy. Everybody can say, "Hey, I want to be a professional quarterback." And I've watched it on Sunday mornings, and I think I could play in the NFL on Sunday. Well, I have a half dozen NFL friends that are quarterbacks, and I will tell you, the time, the effort, the diet, the training, the psychological coaching that they put into honing their trade isn't just because they watch a 30-minute film a week. I mean, these guys are spending 16 hours a day honing their trade. So you know, if you want to be great at something, it's like Malcolm Gladwell said, do it 10,000 times.
Exactly.
So if you're going to run a great business, you can't BS your way through it. And you got to say, I've spent 5 hours writing a business plan. You got to be great, because if there's too many other people that want to wipe you off the face of the map, and you can't fear failure. I mean, I think that's one of the things that was bred into me about, hey, feel the fear and do it anyway. So you may be terrified. I'm going to do this. I'm putting my house at risk and my livelihood, my kids' future, and all that. Yep, yep, got it. Feel the fear and do it anyway. If you don't have that fortitude, you're going to fail. It's self-proclaimed failure. I remember my sister, who's a social worker, when we started the company, and that started that $23 million capital raise. And I didn't ask her for any money, and she was taking care of my mom. She had never made over $42,000 a year. She came to me and she handed me $102,000 check. I'm like, holy moly! And this is 22 years ago. Where did you get $102,000? And it was like $102,000, $546. It was like a really
It's
weird
like,
number.
yeah, yeah.
And I go, "Where'd you get this?" She goes, "Well, I mortgaged my house. This is my retirement, and this is my life savings. Here, I want you to
Holy
have it."
cow.
I'm like, "Oh my god!" You know?
No pressure.
Yeah. So, when things like that happen, you're like, "There's no way I can lose my sister who this is all the money she has in this world. There's no way I'm gonna lose this money."
Yeah,
So,
totally.
yeah, and, she's glad she invested that money with us now, so
So when you were growing, and you were, one of the fastest growing companies, you were still maintaining the company culture. Obviously, that was on purpose. You did that deliberately. Did you know, like, did you have a background of experience knowing that it's that's typically a challenge, or like, I guess what was your background before you
yeah.
started the business?
Well, I worked for a public company, Sunrise, for 5 years, and I worked for another senior housing company for 7 years. And so, I had 12 years of executive management experience before, I launched Aegis 22 years ago. So, that experience led me to come to the conclusion that my business is a people business. And if I'm going to be in a people business, I better be really great to my people, because oftentimes, and this is the thing that people forget, that managers, owners, CEOs forget, it's the point of contact at which your line staff, your lowest paid staff member, touches the customer. I don't mean physically touches, I mean, it has that interaction with the customer that will make or break your business. And just think about this. Let's say you have the fanciest restaurant in town, you have a great chef, and the waitress comes out and she's rude to you, and your food's late, it's cold when it gets there. You don't care if it's the best chef in town. You don't care if they spent a zillion dollars on the interior. You're saying that interaction with that waitress was horrible. I'm never going back. So everything can break down until you get to the last 1%, and you could be toast. Same if you go into a clothing store. They could have bought the greatest fashions. They could have had the best fabrics. They could have had the best store design, the coolest music playing, great window dressing. You go in and the salesman's a jerk, and you're like, I'm never going back there. So oftentimes business breaks down at the point of service, at which your lowest paid staff member comes in contact with the customer. And that experience, that emotional experience, is so bad that you don't even care about the product. And that's what most people fail to acknowledge. I used to write a column for Success Magazine, and I wrote this one column. This is probably 25 years ago, called "The Last 1%," and it was a true story about the shoe store that I went to buy my wife shoes for in Christmas, and they had this phenomenal display of women's shoes, and I knew she wanted this one kind of shoe, and it was about a week before Christmas. And I was dying to buy her this present. So I go in, I ask the salesman, hey, do you have this shoe in, size 8? And so he disappears, and he disappears for like 30 minutes. And, I'm looking around, and, they have all these great displays and all this Italian fashion, and they've done everything right. The people are all dressed really, swaggy. And so the guy comes back after 35 minutes. I go, did you go to lunch, or what happened here? And he's like, oh, what can I help you? And I'm like, yeah, I gave you this shoe 35 minutes
Yeah.
ago. Ask, and you said, oh, he goes, oh, yeah, 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 I forgot. I'm like, are you kidding me? So
Seriously?
yeah, so he goes, he takes the same shoe again. He's gone for like 15 minutes. This time I'm like, holy cow, what is going on here? He comes back, and he has a different shoe, and he goes, I don't have this in an 8, but I have this in a 9, completely different
All
shoe,
right.
completely different color. I'm like, dude, my wife's feet is not going to grow, a full size overnight. And that's not even the shoe I want. Why would you bring that? He's like, oh, okay. So my point in telling this story is, the corporation can do everything right. They can have the best product, the best delivery, the best setup, the best show windows. But if that point of service is mixed up, you're toast.
Yeah. No, and I agree, and the exact opposite is true too. So, like, we went to Ruth Chris. Do you have a Ruth
Mhm.
Chris there?
Yeah.
So, and it's a great restaurant, and it's usually, phenomenal service. And so we went to the one here in Savannah, and the meal, like, there was a mistake, and it was no way, shape, or form the server's mistake or anything like that. It was an error in the kitchen, but a lot of people could have had a negative experience there, and the server just blew us away with everything going on with the meal. That I mean, never would we say anything bad about that experience, even though they messed up the meal, and it took a little bit longer than what we expected. But just the engagement
Right.
of the server just saved it.
Yeah, and the point of service is the key, right? I mean, that's the point. Is that person that's on the front line, they can make or break you. So you better treat them really well. I mean, that those are really the CEOs of your company because they can really make you look bad.
Now, you mentioned that those are your CEOs of the company. Do you ever empower them to have like a I know some people I've heard that they do like each person is their own little mini business. Like, is that do you do anything similar to
Well,
that
I'll tell
or
you something we do. When I worked for another company, I would go to the CEO with all these ideas. And I would say, hey, I have this idea. We should do this. And he's like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. Next day I'd go in, hey, I think we should do this. And he's like, man, enough with the ideas. And so he would blow me off. So every time he blew me off, and this was dozens of times, I would go stuff all these little proposals in a little black box. And guess what happened to that black box when I started Aegis Living? It became the fundamental items for the business plan of my company. All those ideas that were said no to became the fundamental ideas for my business plan. And so, what I never wanted to happen at Aegis Living was I never wanted to say no to an employee. If they had an idea better than if they had an operational idea, if they had a service idea, if they had a safety idea, whatever it is, so we put black boxes in every one of our 40 communities, and every employee is incented to put an idea in there about how to make the company better. It could be anything. And then we reward people financially for these ideas and we broadcast it. We give them all kinds of acknowledgement and so on, so that these people, you know, realize, hey, this is my company too. That's my idea. That programmatic element that you did yesterday with those residents, that was my idea. And so that gives the people a great feel of ownership about what they do and how they contribute.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I have a really good friend of mine here in Savannah. His name's Jesse Cole. If you've ever seen, he wears a yellow tuxedo and he's everywhere. He's super loud guy. He owns a baseball team, the Savannah Bananas, the minor league baseball team, and makes national news all the time. But that's one of the things that they do there. They have boxes just like you mentioned, and they'll do what they call an idea palooza, where they just everybody in the company. It's not anywhere near as large as your company, but they all gather up and they open up the box and they just read out the ideas, and then they're like, okay, well, let's do this for this baseball game, and so they literally are doing just like you said, everything that the employees want to. That's like they have feedback. Yes, that's a great idea. Yeah, it might not work, whatever, but at least it's all, it's not just the CEO saying, no, that's a terrible idea. Let's don't do
Yeah,
that.
right.
I love that. That's an amazing, and they're wildly successful, just like you are. And it's like you said, the employee first
Yeah,
mentality.
yeah.
Employees
It's critical.
absolutely. So I mean, where did you learn that? Where did you get that? I mean, did it just come to you as far as like I've read employee first or people first books and stuff like that, and so that's kind of how we base our company as well. But like it typically, unless you've experienced it, it doesn't. It's not something that's just like, hey, you need to start your company this way because there would be more people that did it. I feel
Well,
like.
I have an interesting backstory in that I grew up with a single mom. I was the youngest of four children. My closest sibling was 7.5 years older than me. We were super poor, super, super poor. And, I always tell people because when people say that, they mean, oh, you mean poor like you couldn't buy the new Jordan tennis shoes? Or no, we were poor like we didn't have food for a week, poor. And so there's a story. My mom came home. She worked as a line cook, and I got a church scholarship to go to a private Catholic high school. She came home from work one day, and we'd moved, and she'd spent all her money on deposits and utility connections and so on and so forth. And she came home one day and she looked rather despondent. And I was about 16 years old. She walked in the door and she said, "We're out of money." And, smart ass kid, I said, "Oh, well, what's new? What That's not real news, mom." And, she walked
Right.
over. We had this little 1 bedroom apartment that was horrible, and walked over to the small little refrigerator, opened up, and I could see the little light come on inside of it. And, inside of it was a little can of carnation milk, a half a cube of butter, and an onion. And she turned around to me and she said, "I'm going to have to steal some potatoes from work." I'm like, "What?" My mom was a very honest person. So it kind of surprised me.
Mhm.
And she said, "Yeah, if I steal, like 10, 12 pounds of potatoes, we can eat this for 2 weeks. I can make potato soup, and this is what we'll eat." And I'm like,
Gut check.
are you kidding me? So, 4 o'clock the next morning, like, performing a bank heist, we went and we stole 12 pounds of potatoes from work. And she said, "Now I want you to know this is a very hard time. I never want you to forget this moment. And we're going to pay these back with interest when I get paid." And she did. But during that 2 week period, she said to me, you know, "Here's one of the things I want you to understand." She was a huge cheerleader of mine. She said, "I know you're going to be wildly successful. You're going to go on to do great things, and you may be president of the United States, but never forget this time that you ate potato soup for 2 weeks." And she said, if you have employees in a company, never forget from time to time they're going to go on to have hard times, and you have to have the emotional intelligence, the awareness to realize that you have to be there for their employees and anticipate their needs. So, those words rang probably a little bit hollow in my ears when I was 16, but they became
Yeah.
cemented in my brain as I got older. And so the first thing I did when I started Aegis Living was we started the Potato Soup Foundation. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So that, the foundation has gone on to help literally hundreds of people. And, no one, we serve, you can take a meal for five home for $5. So our professional chefs will give you a meal to take home to your family for $5. No one goes hungry in our company. No one ever wants for food. Um, so,
Mm,
and if you ever have an emergency situation, the Potato Soup Foundation is there to bail you out in within 24 hours.
that's incredible. That's cool. Thank you for sharing that story with us. That's yeah, that hits home. I mean, truly, that's we didn't experience it exactly the same, but we experienced toughness like that. My wife experienced it a lot harder than I did. She grew up in a rural uh, Appalachian Mountains environment, and it's to hear those stories, and then to hear, to see the success that she's been, after the fact. Um, it, it's really cool. It's really humbling to hear that, and I appreciate that. The Potato Soup Foundation. That's that's really that's really cool. Like I have so many questions about it, but we'll hold off on that because I could go for days asking about all these different foundations that you do for your employees. Yeah. So I guess, I mean, that's truly, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I'm blown away with all the things that you do for your employees and your team in general. And if somebody wants to learn more about you, can you tell us where to
Sure.
go
Yeah.
and what to
I
do?
have my own website. It's just Dwayne, Dwayne, J, the letter J, and Clark. So DwayneJClark.com. You can contact me through that. You can always go to the Aegis Living website, AEGIS living.com. My book, 30 Summers More, we haven't really talked about that, but I have this book coming out on
Yes, yes.
longevity and living well. I've traveled to 82 countries and studied aging and living well throughout the country. That's going to be sold on Amazon, comes out Labor Day. So
Labor Day. And then that's not your first book though.
no,
That's
I
book
wrote a book.
number.
My first book was a book called Help Wanted, and then I wrote a book that's actually being made into a Hollywood movie right now called My Mother, My Son. It's a true story about my growing up with my mom, and then her getting Alzheimer's, and her going through some tough moments. And that the book did really well. It's also sold on Amazon, and it was yeah, adopted by a group of Hollywood agents, and now we're going through the writing process, and it's going to be made into a Hollywood movie.
That's awesome. That's great. And now has your mom been able to see that
No,
success with
not
that?
really. She got Alzheimer's in about 2004, and she passed away in 2010. So she saw the beginnings of it. I mean, I started the company in '97, and she started seeing that. And probably about 2002, 2003, she started to get beginning signs of Alzheimer's. By 2004, she was pretty much in the depths of it. So, but I know she's watching over me and is proud of what I'm doing. I try to honor. We have our own chain of coffee shops too, called the Queen Bee Cafes, and that was her kind of cute little nickname, was the Queen Bee. So we named them after her,
Oh yeah.
and our coffee shop gives 100% of the profit away to charity. Um,
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
we have these great coffee shop that my mom was British, and we make homemade crumpets, and we have three now. We're building three more, so we'll have six in the Seattle region here soon, and so we honor her that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, you do have a little bit of experience on staff with coffee,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
should be good to
exactly. I have a lot of coffee people.
go. Awesome. Thank you again for sharing time with us
Oh,
today,
it's my
and
pleasure.
thank you so much. I mean, I honestly can't thank you enough. But and anybody, I look forward to hearing what their feedback is. All the listeners and everything. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll reach out to Dwayne, or just go to, definitely go to his website and check it out. It's great. I mean, I've checked it out already, and it's packed full of great stuff. You'll research Dwayne for a little while and not learn everything about him. He's full of knowledge and experience. And I thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Oh, I've been honored. It's been fun to do it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Service Business Mastery Podcast. The podcast focused on service business owners, managers, and technicians who are considering becoming business owners themselves. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, if you want to reach out to me, feel free to reach out to me, Tersh at icebound.us. That's my business email address. I've found that it's probably easier to send me messages there. I check that pretty often. You'll actually get an autoresponder letting you know that I only check it twice a day. It's one of those things that I'm trying to automate my life and structure things so I'm not sitting in front of the computer every time it dings. I'm checking emails. I'm trying my hardest to force myself into that routine, and then also my clients. I want to train them so that they're not expecting a response instantaneously. Just a little tip for you: if you find yourself constantly in email conversations all day long, just set up an autoresponder and let them know that you only check your emails twice a day. If you want to test it out, feel free to send me an email and just say I'm testing your autoresponder, and you don't have to reply or something to that effect, and we'll know exactly why you're sending me an email. Again, that's Tersh at icebound.us, not .com. I know it's crazy. It confuses a lot of people. The guy that owns the .com domain wants $45,000 for it. So, .us it is. I'm sure there's several listeners out there who have had a similar struggle. Anyways, thank you again, Dwayne, for coming on the podcast. Don't forget to visit his website, DwayneJClark.com. Also, if you found value in this episode, please share it with your friend. If you have a friend who's in business or considering starting their own business, please share this episode with them. And leave us a review. I mean, that's how people find us organically, is by having as many reviews as possible. So I say it on every episode, and I'll continue to say it. Please jot a few notes down in the review and give us a 5-star review. So with that being said, thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again next week on the Service Business Mastery Podcast, the podcast for service business owners, managers, and technicians who are considering becoming business owners themselves. Have a wonderful week.